Hello and welcome back to the Property Trio, the podcast for the sophisticated property buyer. Today we're diving into some commonly asked questions about tax depreciation, and we're lucky to have our resident depreciation expert, Mike, with us. Just quickly, before we get into that, to all our listeners, if you've got any horror stories of dealing with buyer's agents or mortgage brokers or property depreciation experts, please send them in. We'd like to do an episode on just some of the real life examples and risks and bad experiences that people have had. So please send them in to us.
Special.
Yeah, Halloween's coming up.
What we don't want to just dine out on horror stories. Obviously, that's awful, and it makes me feel sick, the idea of someone having gone through a horror story. But we also want to talk about the remedy, or how you got past it emotionally and got back on the horse as well. So we'll try and make it uplifting.
Yeah, look, it's all for our listeners to know what to look out for when you're making your own decisions for who you're going to work with. But I digress. Back to today's episode, which is all about tax depreciation. And Mike's in the hot seat. We promised we'd have Mike in the hot seat answering all the questions for an episode.
You got a bit left out with the regional one, didn't you? I kind of steamrolled you. I didn't mean to.
Oh, no, that's. I mean, it was good to see you in full form. But I can just picture like the listener drop off as Dave mentions. Today's special is tax depreciation. Oh, no. But we'll try and have some fun. We'll make it.
Yeah, lock the doors. That's what you say, isn't it?
Lock the doors.
Yeah, and you've recently presented to a property investment group, and I thought it would be great for you to share the Q&A with our lovely listeners. So let's crack into it.
Okay, Mike, question number 1. How often should I update or review my depreciation schedule to maximise my tax benefits as an investor?
I had someone call me sort of saying, I got a report from you last year, so I'm back to sort of do it again. I mean, in many respects, I would love that to be the case because these are 40-year reports and I'd have, 40 bits of recurring revenue. I mean, I'd be speaking to you from my Hong Kong house at the moment. But
the reality, to change the legislation.
yeah. But the reality is that the report really lasts you for as long as you hold that property. The only time that you would want to update the schedule is if you've made some improvements. Now, the big difference between, say, an accountant and a quantity surveyor, even though to do what I do, I have to be a registered tax agent, is that I'm qualified to estimate construction costs, whereas an accountant isn't. However, if you put some carpet and let's say a split system into a property, you'll know the date that it was installed and the cost or how much you paid. You can actually give that to your accountant and they can depreciate it as sort of separate and distinct from the depreciation schedule. But in our business, if it's 1 or 2 items, we always do a free update just to make sure you've got one document that's covering the whole thing. The only time that you would need to, say, pay for an updated report is if it was quite an expansive list of improvements, and especially if we needed to go back and inspect the property. So even if you do, let's say, a $200,000 reno, we're not going to say that there's more than $200,000 worth of depreciation. But what we can do is break it up into the components. So things like ovens and cooktops and range hoods and hot water systems, window furnishings and floor coverings, these all depreciate at much higher rates than the building structure. So essentially what you do by breaking it down is you front load those deductions. So to answer the question succinctly, you don't need to update it unless you're making improvements, and you wouldn't only need to be charged by a quantity surveyor if there is a significant amount of work in breaking that down into the categories, because your builder or your tradie, unfortunately, don't break their line items into the categories as given to us from the tax office.
Well, just ballpark for our listeners, what would you constitute a significant amount of work to get another one done?
Yeah, well, I suppose that the value is less important than the actual scope of work. So what was actually done? Like if it's a kitchen, when a kitchen is probably going to have 3 separate plant and equipment items that are going to depreciate a lot faster than the structural part, which is the the cabinetry. That's a
Yeah.
2.5% depreciation rate. So, the value is less important to the actual what's been done. But, if you're talking $10,000 or $20,000, there's probably going to be a fee in updating the report. And if you're talking, $1, $2, $300,000, probably would require an inspection as well to make sure that we're capturing everything in an ATO compliant way.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've got a personal question for you, Mike.
Mm.
Is it possible to backdate depreciation claims?
Oh. How much of your story are you willing to share?
Oh
here,
man,
Kate?
we've already shared all my dirty laundry.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
So embarrassing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Episode 427. Egg and Kate's face were in alignment.
Bake Off's epic fail. My husband was so cranky with me.
I think it just goes to show that you can be a property guru and not think about an obscure part of the Income Tax Assessment Act of 1997, right?
That's it. How on earth did that happen? You know the problem? He thought I did it. I thought he did it. Because we've got this delineation. He does stuff, I do people. He's like, well, Mike's one of your best friends. Surely that's in the people category. Yeah, I got a roasting.
Probably got a point.
From you and from him.
Yeah.
What happened? We missed our deductions. That's the short story of this long journey. We missed very valuable deductions on a property that we did a significant renovation on. And Mark, I rang you saying, remember, there's a period of time where I can claim a bit. What was it again? And now's your chance to answer for our listeners.
And it was 4 years, but for quite some time, it's actually been 2 financial years. So if you think about the financial year that we're in at the moment, that'll finish 30 June 2024. So when you go and do your tax return for the 24-25 financial year, that's kind of like the current focus, but then you can back claim the previous 2 financial years. Now, your accountant is very likely to charge you a fee to amend those previous returns, because if they're already submitted, it's an amendment. But we can give you, with the depreciation schedule, it starts from your date of purchase or your settlement date or the date that you build it. So it'll show everything that you're entitled to claim. It's just a matter of going and amending that previous return. But we've got some data on that. Anecdotally, I saw a lady come through our system who bought a unit off the plan, and she waited 16 years prior to getting in touch with us to do a depreciation schedule. And it was always a rental, in case you're thinking, well, maybe she just lived in it. It was always a rental. So, we're talking in excess of $60,000 worth of deductions unclaimed that could potentially have been, let's say, $20,000 gone from her pocket. That keeps me up nights in a cold sweat.
Yeah, she's left money on the table and the ATO's just gone, thanks very much for that.
Yeah, ScoMo's probably spent it on his Hawaii trip or something. I don't know.
More wine.
Yeah.
Elbow on his new house.
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh, I tell you what, my phone's been going hot with Albo's property deals from journalists in the last little while. So what we did is we looked at 1,000 residential transactions, and we tried to figure out, well, what percentage of people actually missed out on claims. So it was kind of like an expose into education around your entitlements from a tax depreciation point of view. We found 6.7% of those 1,000 people waited so long, i.e. more than that 2-year back claim, to get in touch with us, because we capture their settlement date. Again, that's the start date for the report. And our software obviously knows when they enter our ecosystem. So 6.7% of people, and the average amount they lost was $20,537. Now, I don't have
20,000.
20,537. Yeah, I don't have that written down, and anyone watching on YouTube will see that I'm staring straight down the barrel, because I remember that number, because that's a huge chunk. I was surprised by that. And of course, because journalists like clickbait, I then extrapolated those same data points over the entire investor population at the time. So 6.7% of all investors losing 20,537, and it worked out to be $2.88 billion, just unclaimed deductions floating in the ether. So don't be, they have those little images like, this is Gary, like Gary does this, Gary doesn't claim his deductions. Don't be like Gary. Don't be that guy.
Hopefully there's no Garys listening to this episode.
Oh, you could have used Cate and it would have been a fair
Well,
example.
as in not the name, but people who haven't claimed for more than 2 years.
Don't be like Cate. Yeah.
Don't be like Cate.
Karen. You're the new
So,
Karen.
so now for all the paperwork lovers out there, Mike, what documentation do you need to provide to ensure accurate depreciation calculations?
I think, like, as a property investor, you should garner up some discipline on managing your property anyway. It's going to make life a lot easier for the time that you go to your accountant. So most investors that I know that have a big portfolio will, they'll be tracking all of the expenditure per property and all of the details that they need. I mean, to get a depreciation schedule done, we need to know the name of the purchasing entity. So that could be your personal name, or that could be your family trust, or what have you. We need to know the settlement date or the occupancy completion date if you built the property, that i.e., what is the date that that property came into your ownership. If you've occupied the property, we need to know when you moved out, because the property will still depreciate while you're living in it, but you're not entitled to make claims until the property is available to produce income. So you've really sort of got to be out. Other than that, it's just the history of the building. If you do something to it, we want to know what was done, when was it done, and how much you spent. And that's really the majority of the information that we need to put a report together.
Not too onerous for investors.
No. I mean, at the end of the day, it is homework, and people hate it. They wish that there was just a button that we could push. Like, I told you the address, and my name's Cate. Like, just surely that's enough. Yeah.
Oh dear. Well, another question for you, Mike. How does holding a property in an SMSF, self-managed super fund, affect depreciation claims?
Yeah, this is a question I get semi-regularly, and it's an interesting one. People just sort of saying, like, well, can you claim deductions if you own it in your super fund? The answer is yes. The only nuance to that is your marginal rate of tax. So if you're on 45%, the highest rate of marginal tax, I don't want someone to write in the comments saying, oh, what about the Medicare levy? We'll just ignore that for the moment. The deductions are actually more beneficial to you, because, like, for every dollar of depreciation we show in a report, you're getting 45% of that, right? So a self-managed super fund, it's going to have a 15% marginal rate of tax or a 30% marginal rate of tax. So it just actually makes us work harder to put the same dollar back in your pocket. So from our side of the fence, every now and then we'll come across a property that might be a borderline, i.e., is it worth paying X to get Y? And when it's a self-managed super fund, the numbers can become a little bit tighter. So if let's say you pay $600 or $700 for a report that's giving you maybe $1,100 worth of deductions, for a self-managed super fund, that might be a net negative in, say, the first financial year of claim. We always like to put more money back in someone's pocket than what we cost in the first full financial year. Doesn't mean that the report's not worthwhile. It then sort of speaks to, well, how long do you intend on renting this out? If you rent it out for 10 years, the report will pay for itself probably 3 times over. But it's really just all about that marginal rate of tax.
Yeah, it's really important for the listeners to understand. Obviously, the lower marginal rate of tax, which is what you have in the self-managed super funds, the less benefit you're going to get from the depreciation.
It's the only time where being on the highest marginal rate of tax is good news for you.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Mike. That is good to know. So here's a popular one. Are there any tips for choosing properties that offer better depreciation benefits?
I used to answer that question very seriously, and then I got it asked so many times that, just for my own interest, I just tried to answer it differently every time, or have a lot of fun with it. It's a bit like you meet someone that doesn't eat meat or they don't drink. It's like the onus of proof is on them. Like, oh, why don't you eat meat? Why aren't you a drinker? And I'm sure you get sick of that question, right? So you can make it into a game. So what I've sort of tried to do is say, okay, the best for depreciation, and I'll say, all right, well, what we're going to need is let's zero in on, let's say, South Bank in Melbourne. Let's go 1-bedroom apartment in a complex of 400, indoor pool, outdoor pool, cinema, gym, 3 gyms, why not? 12 levels of basement, 14 lifts, 87 levels. That's probably the best for depreciation. Why?
Brand new.
Brand new, always brand new. Yeah, always brand new. And then people will say, Mike, that sounds like a terrible investment. And I'm like, oh, yeah, it's a shocking investment. Where do you see the strata fees? But you didn't ask me what was the best investment. You said, what's going to get you the highest depreciation claims? Why is that higher? Well, the cost per square metre to build something quite small becomes higher. And if you think about a one-bedroom apartment with a bathroom, bathrooms are a very expensive thing to build compared to the rest of the house. But a one-bedroom apartment is a high percentage of bathroom over the total gross floor area, right? Whereas if it's a four-bedroom house, it's actually going to be smaller. There's increased costs with high rise, but it really also comes down to the common area. So when you own a property, let's say it's a group of 100 units and you own one unit, it won't be exactly like this, but it'll be somewhere in the vicinity of you owning 1/100th of all of the common areas and equipment. So that can be the proximity reader door swipe cards. It can be the fire services. It can be the security systems. It certainly is things like the lifts and the actual foyers and the basements themselves. You will own a small percentage of that, and that all gets chucked into your depreciation schedule. And that's really why units tend to outperform houses on a bang for buck depreciation schedules, because they're higher value to construct and typically will have common area that you're entitled to claim over.
Yeah, and you make the point really well when you answer the question like that there isn't the correlation between being a good property, inverse relationship.
It's almost a perfect. There are exceptions, and we'll talk about those, but if your mission is purely to get the highest tax benefits and to go for the highest depreciation, you'll be walking into a scenario much like this.
Yeah, and you know what, I love tax depreciation. It's a weird thing to say out loud, but I am getting help for it. But I would never buy a property because of its depreciation deductions. Now, the cutoff date for depreciation schedule on the original building structure is 1987. I bought a house built in 1985. Of course, that pained me to be so close.
What's the date and the time in 87?
The 16th of September, 1987. So the property needs...
What time?
Well, I think it's 7:30, like normally if it's a budget speech, right? Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted your story.
No, that's okay.
1985.
Yeah. So it was only a couple of years early, and of course that sort of pained me to be too close. But I think it shows the example that I think everyone should think when they're thinking about depreciation, is that it's a bonus and not a strategy. Yes, there are certain properties that you'll get some great deductions on that might not even be new and could be really good investment stock. But generally speaking, you've got to think about, well, who really advertises depreciation as a benefit as part of a purchase? It tends to be brand new, off-the-plan apartments, house and land packages. And when you have to resort to depreciation as one of the main reasons why you should buy the asset, I actually say that's a red flag.
Yeah. 100%.
Probably shouldn't, and perhaps bad for my professional life. But at the end of the day, I don't really care. Like, I would rather sort of do right by people. There's more than enough people to help that are buying good quality properties. I wouldn't want to go in and say, buy this because of the great depreciation deductions if it's something that's not going to grow. It's all about growing that asset base as an investor.
I've got a question for you about renovations, Mike. If a property is over 40 years old but it's been renovated, does the renovation give you 40 more years of depreciation?
That's a good one. I heard a quantity surveyor say once, new property is always better for depreciation than old. And it's one of those things where it's intuitively correct, and most of the time it probably is, but there are heaps of examples where it's not true. So take, for example, a brand new project home. Let's say it's a 4-bedroom house built for $350K. Compare that to something that's in a place like Surrey Hills. It might be built in the 1920s. It's one of those terraces, but it's had a $4 million renovation on it. I mean, that's going to have way more depreciation deductions than a brand new property. But yeah, technically you're correct. So the report lasts for 40 years from your settlement date, but the last 10 or 5 years might have 0 in it. But if you're buying a property that's been renovated, and let's say it was renovated 5 years before you purchased, it's still got 35 years of those renovations to go, even though the house may have expired. It might not have any depreciation deductions on the original structure at all.
That's very clear, Mike. Now, do you generally have someone attend the property for depreciation, or can you base it just off the photos?
Yeah, these were all live questions submitted to me prior to me having a chat to a group of people, and I sort of wish this question didn't come up, because it's kind of systemic of an issue that we have in the industry at the moment. The Australian Institute of Quantity Surveyors has issued a white paper as a guide for consumers and practitioners that are providing tax depreciation schedules. It's a ripping read. I might be one of the only people that's read
What
it.
makes it a ripping read, just briefly?
I'm being sarcastic.
Okay,
Dave. Yeah, no.
There's not something that, tickles your fancy that might be interesting to us and the listeners?
Yeah, even to me, that it's hard. But the big battleground, the big battleground is on that question. It's the question of the inspection, and that white paper says that the reasons why you would not need to inspect are likely to be infrequent. So, to give you an example, if Cate builds a house and she waits 3 years to give me a call to do a depreciation schedule, which is she's got form for. She will have the exact construction cost. So we can't come in and estimate a construction cost if the cost is known. That's a tax office rule. She might have a full set of plans and a schedule of finishes or inclusions to the property. So based on that, we know exactly how big it is. We know exactly how much it costs, and we know all of the nuts and bolts that's inside it. So we could go and inspect. We could go and do that report without an inspection and pass on a cost saving to Cate. However, if that property was a year old when she purchased it, she's not going to have any of that construction information. So we really would need to physically inspect it, because we don't have a detailed set of plans. We don't know what's in there. And with older properties, we don't know the history. I've stood in a number of properties where I've sort of said to the owner, oh, look, this is where they extended the property. Here's the original wall. And they're kind of puzzled by that. They didn't see that themselves. But we kind of get used to looking at buildings in a forensic way. Certain things have fashions, downpipes. You can date properties by the color of the downpipe or the fascia. There's certain things like stainless steel appliances really didn't exist in 1999. They only sort of started from 2000 onwards. Those are the sorts of things that we go in and we forensically pick up. So really, the circumstances where an inspection is not required is when you have all the information, or the property has already been inspected in the past. And one of the grey areas is, let's say Cate's got I'm going to pick on you again, Cate. Cate's got a unit in a high-rise apartment, which she spruiks every week on this show. Now, we've inspected the place next door. And so we've seen all of the common areas, but the place next door could be a 2-bedroom apartment and Cate's is a 3-bedroom apartment. So there will be quantity surveyors that say, oh, we're familiar with the development. We haven't, we've inspected all of the units before. And if we're working on a new project, we will go and look at all of the different variations and collect that information if we're thinking that the work will come in. But there can be variations from apartment to apartment that can't be seen on the strata plan. There can also be renovations. So in that situation, our preference would be to review our notes of the common area, have an idea about how long it's been since we've been there, and if it's been too long, we'll go back and redo everything. But otherwise, we might just go and inspect that apartment and rely on the the common property that we've previously inspected.
Okay.
Yeah. Now that
that's my last one, Cate. I'm sorry.
So just photos is a preference for no. Don't go off photos.
No, and I mean I was
at too creative, isn't it?
It's ridiculous.
Too much margin for error.
I was at the Accounting Business Expo, and an accountant came up to me and said, I got a report on a service station. And I said, oh, yeah, that's good. Like, service stations have some great deductions in them, the tanks, the Bowser systems. I don't want to bore you with all the different plant equipment items.
Great.
But he said, there was a photo on the report, and I said, "Oh yeah, like some firms will put a photo on the report itself. We don't do that, and we can issue photos if people really want them, if there's no privacy issues with tenants." But it turns out what he wasn't getting at is the uniqueness of having a photo on the report. Is he was actually saying that the report that was done was a photo of the service station that was demolished for the new service station that my client bought. So a quantity surveyor did an online depreciation schedule on a demolished property and issued that as the report for this client. And I said, that's
So he
absolutely
lost
horrific.
so many deductions.
So
Aside
from the fact that they've stuffed it up, the client who was paying for this service probably got a discount because the QS didn't want to go and drive there, missed all the deductions on a new building. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, I mean, it's not fit for purpose at all. I mean, it would be kind of against the law to even use that because that place doesn't exist. It's not producing an income. I mean, that's a caveat of the tax legislation is that the property needs to be, an income producing asset or available to produce income. As rubble on the ground
anymore.
It doesn't. Yeah,
There's
and of
a
course,
new building there.
yeah, and the new service station, that could have had 5 times higher depreciation deductions. Yeah. And I just hate that there are some businesses that sort of say, like, we've got a bronze and a silver and a gold package, and the gold one is that we turn up. And I'm like, that shouldn't be the peak of your service offering. That should be the minimum.
Well, this is a snapshot into chapter 1 of our horror story.
I was going to say that. Yeah.
It's exactly. Horrendous, Mike. Yeah. It's just bad. The things that we do to cut corners and, being, what do they call it? Being penny wise and pound foolish. That's absolutely like what that is. Cutting corners.
Cut corners always bites you on the backside.
1,000%. And, considering I'm not about to quote the cost of a depreciation schedule performed by a QS on a service station, but on a residential property, we're talking under $1,000 to get something that delivers you a lot of return over a period of years. Why? It's like when people try and skimp on a conveyancer or solicitor. They're buying a property and then they're saying, "Oh, I got a quote for $899 and your guys quoted me $1,100." Well, okay, fine. Like, you want to try and save $200 and you're taking a big risk there.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I feel for the consumer because they're within their rights to say, well, everyone should be equivalently qualified. We are working within the confines of the Income Tax Assessment Act. We're working within the confines of, TR 2022/1, whatever the ATO effective lives for plant and equipment are. But I know from the inside that there is a huge variance, and there are so many things that we really pride ourselves on. I mean, we need to be better at communicating our difference, but people are just kind of thinking, well, the rules are set, everyone's got the same degree. How could there be much variance between one quantity surveyor to the next? And I could tell you there is.
It's about accuracy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wowzers.
But on that point for ROI, we actually crunched it. This is going to sound like a bloody sales pitch for my business, but it'd be true for any business, right? We actually crunched the ROI on the first full year of claim. That's what we sort of tend to talk about. We want to try and find at least double our fee in the first full year of claim. Why we say first full is if you could buy it on the 25th of June, you only get 5 days of deduction. So that makes it bloody hard. But it worked out to be 14.5 times our fee in deductions within the first year and over 340x over 40 years. So in terms of an ROI, there's not that much better out there. It's kind of lucky because I'm a pretty terrible salesperson. I've just got a really good product that leaps off the shelves. We either do it and put money back in your pocket, or we don't do it because we analyze it and we say, look, this property doesn't stack for XYZ reasons.
Yeah, it's a great service commitment. I love that. And I'm not just giving you a pat. I think the power of being able to fling you a text message with a link and you say, yeah, nah, it's probably not worth your while, versus, yep, send it through, that's amazing. And I know that not every investor out there has got a hotline to Mike Mortlock, but you've got a fleet of experienced people that can do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, we do lots and lots of those every day. Yeah, nah. It's
great. It's
Part of our
valuable.
parlance. I mean, it makes us sad when we sort of say, oh, there's no deductions in this particular one. But again, it doesn't make it a bad investment.
No,
it could
that's
be a
a high land to
fantastic
asset
one.
ratio, and they'll get great capital growth and they won't get the
Absolutely.
deductions. And that's
Absolutely.
okay. Well, on to another question. What's the difference between a repair you can claim through your accountant and a depreciable item on your schedule?
Yeah, that's something that the ATO has flagged probably the last 4 years at least as something that they're targeting. You know, every year they're like, this year we're targeting the black economy or tradies, or it's never
Real
never
estate agents.
nurses or teachers. You know, it's
It's real estate agents.
yeah, real estate agents, because everyone sort of hates them, and it's okay. But repairs and maintenance is a big one, and the ATO came out with some data a couple of years ago where they sort of said, looking at every investment property owner, we found a 9 out of 10 failure rate to declare things properly, and one of the big problems was repairs and maintenance. Now, why is repairs and maintenance a better way to claim than, say, a depreciable asset? Well, repairs and maintenance is an immediate claim. So if you repair an asset and it costs you $500, you get a $500 tax deduction in the financial year that cost was incurred. Now, if that's a depreciable asset, it has to be depreciated over its effective life. Let's say it's a hot water system, it'll either be 12 or 15 years, depending on whether it's solar, gas, or electric. Whereas, let's say, if it's a widget within a hot water system, like a solenoid, you're not taking an old asset and putting a new one in, which would actually be a depreciable asset. You're spending money to keep something in place or keep something operable. So that's kind of the biggest difference between a repairs and maintenance and a depreciable asset. If you're repairing something that stays in place, like it's a deck or it's a fence or it's a hot water system, that's an immediate deduction. But if you are chucking that hot water system in the bin and putting a brand new one in, you cannot call that repairs or maintenance.
Yeah, and everyone wants to claim it in that first year and not have to wait for the deduction. Hence why it's one of the biggest mistakes people make. They hope they can get it through and claim it fully in year one, but, you know, it's got to be a genuine repairs or maintenance, doesn't it?
And as you can imagine, we get shoe boxes of receipts. We get Excel spreadsheets that were sort of put together by, I don't know, John Nash's understudy. But what we do is we will actually highlight and say, these are the things that we believe would qualify for repairs and maintenance. We'll exclude it from our schedule. That just kind of makes it sort of seem like we're lazy. But if the accountant can claim that, it's a now deduction, an immediate deduction, whereas many of them will have a 40-year effective life. So do you want to wait 40 years to get your deductions back, or do you want to get it in year one? And an accountant that we've done some lives with, Cate, Jeremy Yannizelli, said that we're the only one that he's come across that will actually give that Excel to the accountant to say, look, here's what we think. You know, you go your hardest. If we need to amend what we're doing, we will, because we do want the best outcome for the client. We could chuck it in, but by leaving it out, we can actually give them a better net result by managing that part with their accountant.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like a fair bit of detail to provide for everyone who asks you for a depreciation schedule. You'll actually look at their spreadsheet. It's good. It's a good service.
Nice guy,
good on you. Well done. Look, I think that's a really useful distinction for our listeners, and you know, it's good for everyone to properly understand. So that brings us to an end of our Q&A session with you today, Mike. So thanks for sharing your insights on maximising depreciation.
Pleasure.
And if you have any questions or want to optimise your deductions, remember, Mike's always here to help.
Yeah, we'll give you his phone number, his personal number. And,
send all your spreadsheets to him directly.
Home address, tax file number. Let's put it all in the show notes.
All right. On that note, we'll head off for our gold nuggets.
Now it's time for us to go mining for our gold nugget property tip of the day.
So my gold nugget is for all of those prospective property investors who have had advice from an accountant, well-meaning or otherwise, to target something brand new and high density because they need to maximise their tax deductions. If you're getting this kind of recommendation, I absolutely implore you to get a second opinion, or maybe chat to someone who's qualified to give property advice as opposed to taxation advice. And I know a lot of great accountants, but I also know a lot of accountants that just think about property investment as a vehicle to pay less tax, and you can wind up getting something that doesn't grow in value and only gives you 45 cents in the dollar while it's losing value. So like me and you two, we try to stick to our lane, and I really never want to go into the accounting space, but the same goes for accountants. So that's one little furphy out there that I see a lot of people tripping up on, and ultimately your accountant is there to help you build wealth, not just avoid tax.
Yeah, 100% concur with that, and I've seen that many a time, particularly with medicos.
Look, I had one, and now I've sort of got two because Cate prompted me on another one. One thing that's popped up in the past is accountants have said to their clients, it's not worthwhile getting a depreciation schedule. And the client has perhaps listened to something that I've said on a podcast or read a blog, and very sheepishly sort of said, oh, my accountant said it's not worthwhile, but I just thought I'd check with you. Always check, because the amount of times we've done reports that the neighbour, the real estate agent, even the accountant said it's not going to stack, would be quite staggering. And it's funny, like when we do actually attach a copy of the report to send to their accountant to make it easier to do the tax return, I sort of have this sort of smirk on my face to say, yeah, here's that thing that you said wasn't very valuable. Like you're going to do a pretty good job with their deductions this year. That's a big one, because we do it all for free. Like, it's not just us. I don't think there are any quantity surveyors that will charge you to give you an idea of it or an estimate of the potential claims. Of course, you can't rely on that. You need to pay for a report to get the whole thing. But you can get a fairly good idea just by looking online, just by researching when it was built. You can see improvements, renovations as well. The other thing was perhaps preempting hate mail in the comments, and that's this notion that you have to pay it all back. We probably don't have room on the show to unpack the whole thing, but there's people that will say, depreciation is not worthwhile because you just have to pay it back at the end anyway. But it really only relates to the structural components. And if you hold the asset for 12 months, you get a 50% exemption, and then it's just at your marginal rate anyway. Take all of those things into consideration, and the fact that you're getting $1 today rather than worrying about a fraction of $1 that you might need to pay back in 20, 30, 40 years, that sort of rhetoric, I think, is not terribly helpful to be thrown out there without sort of drilling down on that. So if you hear that,
really
do
good
some
point.
more research.
And you're talking about where it comes off the cost base when you sell, and therefore you pay some capital gains tax. But if you own it for less than a year, the capital gains tax is halved, and then it's only
More than a year,
yeah, more than a year, and then 12 months and 1 second. And I suppose it's probably the one year and 1 day, isn't it? And then you have your own tax rate come off that as well. It's a pretty low number when you boil it down.
Yeah. You cut it in half, and then you cut it by your marginal rate, which is, if it's 45, it's nearly in half again. And then there is the time value of money. The easiest time to hold on to an investment property is not at the beginning, because that's where your rent will be forever, presumably the lowest, because it'll grow in time. You may pay down some principal, plus time sort of erodes the value of debt anyway. That's probably another episode in your wheelhouse, Dave. So we're always, pro getting the deductions.
You may not ever sell the property. You might bequeath it. Yeah. Bird in the hand's worth two in the bush.
That'll do.
And on that note.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Mike. That's been awesome. Yeah. I think you've sort of nailed a lot of the big questions that people ask and want to know when it comes to claiming depreciation on their investment properties. So, for all our listeners, if you're unsure, just send the link to your property through to Mike and your spreadsheet, and his team will have a quick look. Maybe hold off on the spreadsheets, but they can give you an indication if you're unsure.
Sorry,
happy
Mike.
to help. Sorry.
And lastly, happy 20th birthday to your business, Dave. That's a massive milestone.
Thanks, Cate. That's 20 years. it's been a long journey, had its ups and downs, but yeah, it's certainly a nice period of time to reflect upon, and we're having a bit of a
bevy
party this Friday night to celebrate, which should be good fun.
Very cool. Well, we'll see you there, and we'll see and chat to our listeners this time next week.
See everyone next week.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.